It's Mock Draft Monday, which means we're back to picking every single Monday from here on into the draft a winner of who submitted the best mock draft in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. We're going to talk about that, but also today we're going to focus on Devin Bush and the question of should the Steelers count on him and wait for him to continue to develop, or should they start their plans for who should be their starting linebacker star for the future? We'll talk about that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button for all of our daily content. If you give us a 5-star review with a positive comment on Apple Podcasts, you'll get a shout out at the end of the show. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Be sure to visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, as I said, today is going to be focusing on Devin Bush as far as a conversation on your Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I made it no secret my position on Devin Bush. I thought a big part of what happened this year with his step back that he took was obviously still recovering from the ACL, not being the same guy, but also not getting any help from the defensive line in front of him that just kept letting him have to face off against centers and guards who were just walking up into his space and blocking him all season. And that's not to say that he doesn't have to get better, because he absolutely does. And I think he knows he does. But that question as far as will Devin Bush round himself back out, because make no mistake, he was playing every snap for the defense before he got hurt in 2019. And when he was in there, he was a difference maker. Even if he wasn't making the splash plays, he was covering so much of the middle of the field and doing so well against the run that it opened up opportunities for everyone else, because the middle of the field wasn't something that teams could pick at. That changed in 2020 when he was hurt, and 2021 when he when he came back. And that's why he was not consistently on the field in 2021 like he was in 2020 and 2019. But when you look at Devin Bush and you ask yourselves, what are the key factors that you need him to do? The Steelers, all the best Steelers defenses, when you think of from the 70s to the 90s to the 2000s and even the latest parts of the 2010s, they all had inside linebackers who were balling out. The best version of the mid-2010s Steelers defense was when Ryan Shazier was balling at the middle line, at the inside linebacker position. The best version of those 2000 Steelers defenses was when James Ferrier came to town and he was wrecking shop at inside linebacker. The best version of the 90s Steelers defenses was when Levon Kirkland was the man in the middle of the field and keeping everything on par. And of course, the 70s, you don't got to say nothing else about Jack Lambert. It's part of the Steelers' legacy. They've always had a guy in the middle of the field that does that. Devin Bush looked like he could have been that guy. In 2019, when he came onto the scene, he had over 100 tackles. He had the most tackles by a Steelers rookie in franchise history. He was going sideline to sideline. He was getting beaten coverage, but learning from it. I mean, and I posted film studies where one time he'd get beat by a certain route. The next time he would learn and adjust, and he wouldn't be beaten by that route. And then he would have to be beat by another one. He'd have to keep learning. But again, he came into the league at 21 years old, still very young, a guy that you look to see to grow. But the question is, will he? And that's a big question that the Steelers have to gamble on, because he's now been in the NFL for 3 seasons, which means this is the final year of his official rookie contract, which means they have to decide on the 5th-year option. And I don't know if Devin Bush has really earned that. That's up to the Steelers to see that, because of his lack of production this past year. And it's going to be a tough gamble, because now you're saying, do we commit ourselves to this guy and trust that he will get back to where we need him to be? Because Devin Bush can't just be a role player inside linebacker. He has to be a good inside linebacker. He has to be a very good inside linebacker. That's why they traded up to get him. Because every year when they were waiting for those guys that were at least decent inside linebackers who could play off the ball and who could have functional athleticism at the position while also defending the run, they kept waiting for those guys, and those guys kept getting picked right before the Steelers could go. So that's why they said, hey, we got to go trade up and get that guy. But the fact of the matter is, when you're talking about Devin Bush, you're talking about a guy that you traded up to get to be an X factor, to change games. And I'd say for a while he was changing games, and maybe not, Minka Fitzpatrick style or TJ Watt style, but still he was really helping in the middle of the field. He was a guy that you could point to and say that's an asset to the defense. He has to get back to doing that this year, because if he does not, then one, then you have to rethink your draft plans. But two, it kind of puts the Steelers in a bit of a bind, because now they're saying, dang it, we have to go reinvest into the position that we already invested a significant amount of capital into when it comes to draft picks. Now, say what you want about, Devin Bush. I think it's way too early to say that as far as that, because again, this was 1 year coming off an injury, and even Vince Williams stood up for him on Twitter during the season. We talked about that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast during the season, about how, you know, he was saying, like, listen, Devin's always been a guy who plays off of his speed, off of his explosiveness, and being able to move. And when you can't trust your legs because you're still worried about your ACL a little bit, or you're figuring out how to get that back, or how to be that guy again, it takes time to be that guy. And there were times in 2021 that I thought he started to figure it out. I think in the final, the second half of the season, I think against the Vikings, he started to figure it out a little bit in the second half. And there were a couple games where I thought, okay, Devin Bush is putting it together. But then he started to fall off. Again, when you look at this year, 2019, 109 combined tackles. Great number for an inside linebacker. Also had 9 of those for loss, had a sack, recovered 4 fumbles, got his hands on 4 passes, forced a fumble, got 2 interceptions. Great. That's exactly what you want out of your rookie guy. But then since then, he only played 5 games in 2020. Granted, pretty good 5 games, 26 total tackles in those. He was a big factor in them shutting down Saquon Barkley in week 1. But then in 2021, we saw that the step back. Only 70 tackles, played less snaps because they weren't trusting him on the field. Only 2 tackles for loss. Only recovered 1 fumble. Did get his hands on 4 different passes. Did have an interception in the playoffs, so that was created by TJ Watt, but still, but not the progression that you want to see. But again, we're taking account for his struggles there. So the question now becomes, what do the Steelers really want an inside linebacker? And we've talked about the importance of this all season long, and the importance of this to start this offseason. I truly believe the Steelers' best plan for 2022 and beyond is to form as elite in a defense as you can. You haven't really been able to fully invest because you had contracts like Ben Roethlisberger, like Marquise Pouncey, like David DeCastro, but all those guys, they're gone now. You don't got to worry about that anymore. You got $31 official $1 million in cap space. That'll get up to 40 when Ben officially comes off the books, because that has to happen at a different time, and it's weird and it's numbers and we don't always get it. But know and trust that money will push them up to around 40 million, and then they can cut some other guys, maybe some older guys that they don't want around it anymore, that aren't contributing as much, like a Joe Schobert, maybe an Eric Ebron, other guys like that. They push them away. You get yourself up to 50-ish million, and then you could still do cap restructures with guys that have big contracts like Cam Hayward, like TJ Watt, push money around, and you get yourself to 60. And then all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, we can get a top corner. We can get another inside linebacker. We can get another interior defensive lineman if Stephon Tuitt can't come back. We can get another depth edge rusher if we want to pay them. We can get another safety if we want to pay them. There's all different moves that you can do. But part of this does depend on, what do you see being the role of Devin Bush in the Steelers' future? And ultimately, that's up to Kevin Colbert and probably Brandon Hunt. We know the GM search is still ongoing, and they continue to interview more people, but we're presuming it's still going to be Brandon Hunt because he's been with the organization for so long. Now, I want to talk more about this Devin Bush situation and the linebackers, because it's also about the linebacker class in this NFL draft class of 2022 that I think makes the conversation even more interesting. And then in the third segment, we will get to Mock Draft Monday and congratulate our first winner of the Mock Draft Monday season. So we'll be doing that in a bit here. But first, we got to talk to you guys about Built Bar. It's that time of the year where pretty much everyone's starting to give up on their New Year's resolutions, but not this year. You're going to stick to it. You're going to eat right. And I give you a simple cheat code. It's called Built Bar. You go out and you're trying to think, man, I need to eat a snack. I need to keep myself full, but I don't have something that's healthy but also tasting good. Built Bar's here to solve your problems. Have you tried their Puff flavors now? Because if you haven't, you're missing out on the best tasting Built Bars around. Puffs are the new protein-infused marshmallows that are marshmallowy, they're fluffy, but they're still covered in 100% real chocolate, and they still come in several different flavors like cinnamony churro, coconut marshmallow, banana cream pie, and all great different flavors. All Built Bars, not just the Puffs, are covered in 100% real chocolate. They're low in calorie with 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. But they pack that protein. Compare that to the average candy bar that gives you 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. There's so many flavors to choose from. When you go to Built.com to get your next order of Built Bars, you can get coconut, almond, peanut butter, brownie, double chocolate, raspberry, cookies and cream, salted caramel, mint brownie, and so mmany more. The only place you can find out what those are is Built.com. When you go to Built.com, be sure to use the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15, LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your next order at Built.com. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're continuing our talk on inside linebackers, Devin Bush, per se, and how he plays into the Steelers' future at linebacker. Now, again, a lot of this comes down to, what do the Steelers want? Do they want to believe in him? Should they draft his partner this year? Should they continue to look at that? You still got Buddy Johnson back there on your roster. You brought him up for a couple games and you want to see how he grows. You want to draft a guy that's going to pair with Devin Bush? Do you want to draft his eventual replacement? Because those are two different strategies right now. And like I also said, we suggested last week right on this show, the potential of signing maybe a Miles Jack from the, trading to get him from the Jaguars. He's their biggest contract right now. He's in his prime. He'd be some guy that you could pay, say, hey, be our number one linebacker. And then maybe Devin Bush feeds off of his energy and they become a really good pair, maybe like the Levante David and Devin White for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Not saying that they're the same, but the same of veteran who's been doing it for a little while and young guy who's learning how to find his role in the NFL. So there's that possibility. But let's look at the NFL draft possibilities this year, because this is a good linebacker class, at least in my opinion. Now, you have your top two guys that everyone's talking about where they go in the first round. Devin Lloyd, Nakobe Dean. Now, Devin Lloyd, Utah, 6'3", 235. He's the guy that a lot of people say, that's the overall, you could play him any way you want. If you want him used as the Mac 3-4, the Buck 3-4, the Mike 4-3, whatever you want to do, that guy's going to be able to do it. But Nakobe Dean, a little bit smaller, good linebacker. You saw him play for Georgia. You loved his tenacity, and you would not complain if he's on your team, but a little bit smaller. And when you think about it, and this is where I have it with pairing him with Bush, you kind of get two Bush builds in the Steelers linebacker room. Now, if both of them play at a high level, that's great, but you want to have oftentimes, and what the Steelers do with their 3-4 defense, and even when they come out of their 3-4 defense into the nickel like they do most times nowadays, you still want to have linebackers who are athletic but can stop the run, who can be physical, shed blocks, get after guys. And Nakobe Dean is more of closer to Devin Bush's style. I think he'd be fine. I think he'd be really good. Steelers fans would enjoy watching him, but there'd be a question: can he consistently do that? And at the level that, kind of frees up Devin and they can kind of work as a pair. But if you get a Devin Lloyd, first of all, I'm not sure Devin Lloyd's going to be around. I think he's going to get picked before the Steelers go. But if you got a Devin Lloyd, just hypothetically, that guy would become your number one. He'd be the guy kind of taking over that role. And then you'd see where you could kind of put Devin Bush, help in coverage, help as the speed linebacker, going sideline to sideline. And maybe that's your pair. But again, if you go to Devin Lloyd, or Nakobe Dean, you're probably replacing Devin Bush. And I'm not so sure that's the place you want to be, is replacing a player that you have on your roster right now, as much as investing in another spot to fill an important roster spot. And you can still use the first round pick to go get an offensive lineman. If you want Trevor Penning, an offensive tackle, if you want Tyler Linderbaum at center, if you want to get, a top corner that may fall down to you, one of those guys. But I think that there's enough good off-ball linebackers in this draft class that would address what the Steelers kind of want and need for them to be able to say, hey, we can hold off on that in the first round and we can get other players, or even trade back and pick up more picks, however they want to do it. Of those guys of that second and third levels here, Christian Harris is the one that everyone's going to jump out at. Why? Because he played at Alabama. He is a run stuffer. He's 6'2", 232. You like him. He has the pedigree. He has the Nick Saban-ness. There's a lot to attract you there, and I get that entirely. If he's there in the second round, definitely worth a look. Would not complain there. But even still, after him, there's guys that I really like, that I think that could play a good role for the Steelers. Some people would like Darian Beavers from Cincinnati. He's 6'4", does pack 250-ish. He's going to bring it. I think that would be a like to look. But I think even if you go into, part like the third round, if you can get a Quay Walker of Georgia, he's a 6'3", 240 guy, or a Chad Muma of Wyoming, I've liked these guys. They're more instinctive. They're bigger. They can help against the run a little bit more while also not being too much of a liability in the pass game. That's the kind of partner you want. Now, Buddy Johnson, when he was drafted out of Texas A&M, there's excitement around there because there's a potential that he can grow into something. But when you're drafting a guy that further back, it's going to take him a bit to learn the defense. And that's what I think that was his biggest struggle in 2021 and why he didn't see much of the field. Whenever we asked Jerry Osofsky or Keith Butler about it, they were kind of all like, yeah, he still has a bit to go. He still has a lot to learn. So maybe he becomes part of that equation, but drafting one of these guys would give you another person in that rotation to say, hey, we have another person here that can help out. And even if you go get a Miles Jack, you keep yourself with another guy. You keep yourself with a guy behind Miles Jack and Devin Bush to give you another option, and that way you're not immediately going to Marcus Allen being a safety converted to linebacker for a fourth year in a row. But that's why I'm saying you go with those guys, you go with bigger body dudes who could help you, who show that they're competent against the pass, very good against the run, and look like they can fit into your defense and be that team defense kind of guy that keeps everyone on the same page. But ultimately, the Steelers' plans at inside linebacker, I think, play a huge role into whatever kind of defense they're going to evolve into over the next 5 years. Because if they don't accomplish this mission, if they don't figure out inside linebacker and Devin Bush is still a liability next year, and they don't get a solid number 2 to pair with him, I just don't think that they're paying Joe Schobert the kind of money that he's getting paid right now to stick around and do the kind of production that he had this year. Even though I do think he was important to what the Steelers were able to manage out of 2021. If they don't get that guy to either to star, if Devin Bush doesn't become the star linebacker, or they don't find the star linebacker, or they don't have the guy that pairs with Devin Bush to kind of make the middle of the defense a stronger point for the Steelers, this is going to be a defense that's going to have holes in it. And you don't want holes when you want the elite defense, especially when you're trying to build that elite defense so that it can feed off the ground game that you're hoping to build on the offensive line and buy you time to be able to get that franchise quarterback down the line. Or if you think you get it this year in the draft, you're not putting too much pressure on that quarterback because you have the elite defense and the run game to boot. All that being said, we do have to look at players who you could pick all over the board. And to do that, we will announce our first mock draft Monday winner here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. If you've been a long-time listener of us, we've been doing this for a while now. Last year, I made it an even bigger thing. But basically, every Monday, if you're in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, you post a screenshot of your mock draft. That way I can see your name. There's no questions about it. I pick through them. I don't always pick the same thing all the time. I do have things that I like. I do have players that I think are good. And if you bring those up, I'll talk about them. But this way, we have a fun way to get listeners who enjoy the show, get shout outs on the show, while also talking about different prospects the Steelers could consider in the NFL draft. So we'll do that in just a minute here, right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Football might be over this season, but basketball is in full steam ahead for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props to where the next coach is fired is going to land, betonline.net is the number one spot for all your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, UFC, odds, right down to Olympic competition and information. Head to the website today and be sure to use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We are here doing our first mock draft Monday. Now, I meant to say this at the beginning of the show, but there's a reason I'm not talking about the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl results, whoever won, because I recorded it before the Super Bowl, because I'm trying to watch the Super Bowl. I'm trying to enjoy an evening and not have to be up till 2 a.m. recording an episode and editing and publishing and doing all this other stuff. So I can do that. But we will talk about the Super Bowl in Tuesday's episode. But I recorded this because I was like, hey, it's the Locked On Steelers episode. We don't care who wins. I mean, we do care who wins. But let's talk about Steelers on the first day. And then on Tuesday, we'll be talking about, did we learn some things? Or there's some things that we want to glean off of that could provide insight to what the Steelers' future is in the NFL and what direction the NFL is headed? Sure. But again, we'll explore that on Tuesday. Now, for today's Mock Draft Monday winner, like we said, we're going to do this every weekend, every Friday, Saturday or so in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group. If you're not in it, get on Facebook search Locked On Steelers, ask to join the group. I'll add you as soon as I can. And every Friday to Saturday, or into the Sunday, I will post a post that says, hey, this week's Mock Draft Monday post. All you got to do is post a full screenshot of all your picks, who the players were. Please indicate if you made trades. It makes it easier on me. And then if I see a draft that I think fits a good discussion point for the podcast, I will bring it up. You will get a shout out in the show, and that's how that works. So without further ado, today's first winner is Robert of Facebook Live, or of the Facebook group, Robert Poirier. Thank you so much, Robert, for committing your submission. And thank you to everyone. We had lots of really good picks, but I wanted to pick on this one because I thought it had some good options here. Now, I put it on the screen for our YouTube viewers. If you're listening at home, Robert went, the kind of went some very traditional routes here, and that's why I wanted to make him the first one here. So congrats again, Robert, on winning Mock Draft Monday. But Robert at 20 went and got the pick that I think a lot of Steelers fans, if you pay attention on social media, if you see a lot of hype talk, everyone wants this guy. It's Tyler Linderbaum, the offensive lineman, the center out of Iowa. Everyone loves him. He has the good build. He's a leader. He's strong. He can move. He can do all these things. And I think more people are poking into his tape and saying, okay, maybe he's not so good here. Maybe he's not so good there, but he is really good here. And people are starting to question, should the center be the 20th overall pick of this draft class? Listen, the center was a huge weakness for the Steelers. If they can get it solidified, I think it's that important. I do think Tyler Linderbaum would be a good pick at 20. I'm not so sure he's going to be there. There are teams ahead of the Steelers that need centers, including the Eagles, who picked right before them. But there's a lot of questions there. But I do think that's a good pick. I think that addresses the center position, and it allows Kendrick Green, hey, you can bump over to guard, be cool, play cool over there, learn that position. And if it's sink or swim, you do great over there, great, awesome, we'll keep you around. You solve that problem. If not, well, they already got their center, so they're not hurt up too bad by that decision. Robert's next pick in the second round at 52nd overall is a pick that I think a lot of people are going to come to really like over the next few months talking about the NFL draft, and that's Travis Jones, interior defensive lineman from Connecticut. This dude just wrecked everything in his path in the Senior Bowl. I talked about him after the Senior Bowl. I thought he was really good. You saw him in practices. He looked good. The game, he looked good. And then you look at his tape, throughout his college years, man, that dude's mean. And I know some people are thinking, like, Chris, wait a minute, why are you doing this? What are we doing here? Because we got all these, we got all these interior defensive linemen like Cam Hayward and Stephon Tuitt and Tyson Alulu, and oh, that's right, both of them were gone this year, and that led to a lot of problems. And that's my point. Stephon Tuitt, we don't know if he's going to be back. Supposedly, Mr. Rooney did say that he was going to be talking with Tuitt in the coming weeks. So I imagine that conversation is coming up pretty soon. But even without him, Tyson Alulu, he's in his mid-30s. I mean, we're talking 35 here. This guy is up there. I'm not sure how much you can count on him. You need some fresh legs at the interior defensive line. You need some bullies. Travis Jones looks like a bully. I like the pick, Robert. Then the third round, you go for a cornerback. And I thought this was interesting because the Steelers do need to buff up at corner, whether it's signing a free agent, which I think they need to do anyways, or getting a guy in the draft. And one of the corners the corner that Robert got in the third round was Kobe Bryant. Now, it's not Kobe Bryant, the late basketball great from the Lakers, but and he's not even spelled that way. It's spelled with a C and a Y instead of a K and an E. But Kobe Bryant is a cornerback, 6'2", from Cincinnati. And what I like about this pick here, Robert, is that you went for a cornerback that has ball skills. This guy broke up 18 passes over his 2 years playing for Cincinnati. He had 7 interceptions. He looks like a guy who can play the ball well. When it's up in the air, he tracks it, he finds it, and he gets his hands on it. That, I think, has been one of the biggest struggles the Steelers have had over the last 12 years, finding corners who can do that part and then combine it with the tackling. They've got a lot of tackling corners who could tackle real well but couldn't track the ball real well. And in this new Terrell Austin-led defense that he's now coordinating, I think he'd like some guys who can attack the ball in the air, win those battles. And I think that's also going to be crucial when you're facing teams like the Cincinnati Bengals, who have Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, and having guys, cornerbacks that can run, jump, and deal with the length. That's another thing. Having a corner that is 6'2", a little bit taller, those guys are important. So Kobe Bryant, I liked your pick there. Then you went receiver with the 137th pick in the fourth round, Justin Ross. Going to Clemson, a former wide receiver U destination, going back to the Martavis Bryant place. I get it. He's 6'3", big slot, and he loves to go up and get the football. I like the pick there too. I think the Steelers should lean more to get a pure speedster because they got a big slot guy in Chase Claypool, even they didn't use him as a big slot guy this year. And I'm not going to get mad. I'm not going to make this a Matt Canada episode, so we're not going to do that. But you know what I'm saying. But I think that a fast guy would a speedster, a Mike Wallace, a guy take the top off this defense, burn these guys down the field while Chase Claypool kind of runs over the middle, uses his big frame, and Deontay Johnson uses his separation to make big plays. I think that would be a dynamic fit there. But still, Justin Ross, high point winner. Maybe he becomes that big frame guy in the middle. And Chase Claypool, he does have burners. Maybe he becomes the speed guy. And then your last two picks in the 7th round, because remember the Steelers don't have 5th and 6th round picks this year because of trades and such. You get Ellis Brooks, linebacker out of Penn State, 6'1", 240. He's a run stuffer, a block shedder, not a big hitter, and okay in zone coverage, but a guy you could say, hey, 7th round pick, figure it out in camp, make your way into special teams. If you don't, oh well, we took a 7th round shot. There's no busts in the 7th round. I've seen some people say, oh, that guy with a bust in the 7th round. Don't ever say that. That's dumb. You don't know football if you say there's a bust in the 7th round. That's ridiculous. Most 7th rounders, they're barely hanging on training camp. Trey Norwood and Presley Harvin, they're the exception. Presley Harvin, he's gonna have to get better, but still, you get a punter in the 7th round, you get a safety who contributes the way that Trey Norwood did. You're happy with that if you can get 4 years out of some guys. Your final 7th round pick was Smoke Monday, 6'3" safety out of Auburn, box safety, aggressive versus the run, also plays against tight ends because of his size. Maybe you convert that. Maybe he becomes that guy. He maybe becomes what Marcus Allen has become, and maybe he's a better version of Marcus Allen. I like those picks there. So again, congratulations to Robert, our first mock draft Monday winner with Tyler Linderbaum, Travis Jones, Kobe Bryant, Justin Ross, Ellis Brooks, and Smoke Monday. And I guess that's a great way to end Mock Draft Monday is with a guy named Monday. Also, Smoke's his first name? I like that. Anyways, that's our Mock Draft Monday. Thanks again to everyone who played. We'll be playing again next weekend, so be sure to get your mock draft in. Be sure to look out on the Locked On Steelers Facebook group to post your winners. Thanks again to Robert for his contribution, and thank you for checking in on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We thank you for making us your first podcast listen every day. And again, you can subscribe to this show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. Be sure if you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button on this video, hit the subscribe button for all of our daily content. If you want to help out the show even further, go on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star review with a positive comment. Doing both at the same time get you a shout at the end of the show. That being said, I'm off to go watch the Super Bowl. Full disclosure, I'm not recording this live for my old joke with Tony Serino that I used to do here. I've recorded this well in advance. I haven't watched the Super Bowl yet. We'll talk about the Super Bowl and any storylines that might come out of that for Tuesday's episode right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. I'll see you then.